Hi, this is Steve Bragg, and this video covers a dive trip that covered the Grand Cayman area and also Little Cayman on the Aggressor liveaboard dive boat. Now, one of the items that the Caymans is known for, to say the least, is its sea turtles. There are probably several thousand of them, and they tend to, once they get a little older, realize you're not a good thing and turn around and take off when they see you coming. But these little guys, this one's only about a foot long, came very, very close, almost banged into my wife who's taking the video, and then slid off into the upper reaches there. In addition, one of the items Grand Cayman is known for is Stingray City. There's two areas. One is for snorkelers, which is shallow, and one's a bit deeper, which is for divers. This is the deeper part, and that's me holding a chopped up piece of squid in my hand, and these stingrays zoom by and they sniff it. And then they start circling in closer and closer, and then they basically vacuum it right out of your hand. I will not say they're tame. These are wild animals, but as you can see there, you can also pet them a little bit. Now, something you should not pet at all is a lionfish. These have been introduced, unfortunately, from the Pacific, and those spines you see are basically lethal. So this one is spreading them out as he sees us coming closer for the video, and that means go away. Also, one of the things that's really neat in the Caymans is its groupers. Groupers are basically predators. They're going around chomping on smaller fish, as we'll show in a minute, but they're also remarkably tame. So here's my wife, that's not me since I do not have lavender fingernails, petting one of them. And sometimes they'll come right up to you and even circle around underneath you, look through your camera to see what you're taking pictures of, all kinds of amazing things. So really pretty cool. Also, groupers will occasionally be sitting under overhangs or just out in the open in something called a cleaning station, where I guess you could call it dentistry. They're waiting for some shrimp or smaller fish to go right into their mouths and clean them up a little bit. In this case, we have a grouper sitting under an overhang with a small fish, in fact, tooling around in there. Some groupers go a little bigger. In this case, we have a very unusual video of a large grouper that has eaten a small grouper, and you can see him trying to choke it in underneath that overhang. We also have cowfish. This is a fairly large one. They're normally chomping on the reef. We're keeping things cleaned up, I suppose you could say. This one does not seem to know what to do, so he eats a little more and then he finally takes off. We also have porcupine fish. This is a fairly large one. He takes a quick look at Melissa and then takes off in the opposite direction. These can get up to a couple of feet long. Quite impressive, though a little clunky looking. Also, this is a Little Cayman area. Lots of slot canyons, which is just a narrow crevice in the coral reef that you can go through. And it's a slot canyon because you can go up if you get a little nervous. People do get claustrophobic in these things sometimes. But in this case, you can see the light coming down, and that's because if you need to, you can just turn around and go up, and it's a clear shot right up to the surface from there. In a moment, you'll see the camera panning up, and in fact, you can see that it's a very easy trip up if you need to. On the other hand, some swim-throughs are a little bit more, shall we say, enclosed. So in here, we have a group going into a tunnel that does in fact come out the other end. It's not a cavern in there. It can be dark and gloomy. There's no overhead light coming in. And also people going through first tend to stir up the silt on the floor. And so people coming in later, like in this case, have a rather cluttered view of things. And so these require someone who does not suffer from claustrophobia, and it does not hurt to have a flashlight with you. And eventually, of course, there you are getting out the other end. Now, there are a number of reefs in the Cayman area. This one happens to be the Doc Paulson. A lot of these ships have been cleaned up prior to their being deliberately sunk. This one's not quite the case. You can see a fair amount of cabling lying around, and it's a bit of an issue because inexperienced divers can go in here and get their tanks, hoses, whatever it might be, hooked on one of these things and have a very difficult time getting disengaged. People who are more experienced tend to keep their hoses very tight, which means you don't have anything trailing, so nothing can get hooked. In this case, Melissa's going through an area that has lots of good ambient light from overhead holes in the hull, and so she can see pretty well where to go. Also, a nifty feature in some of these is what looks like a mirror overhead. She's pointing the camera straight up. What that is air that's come out of people's regulators, and it's pooled up in the ceiling and turned into basically a mirror. There's another one right there, so you can see the reflection of what's actually below you. These are fairly common in wrecks. Now here's another wreck. This is a well-known one, the Kittiwake. This was intentionally sunk about 5 years ago, so you can see it looks fairly clean on the hull. This is the bow, and that's me way down the bottom going around it there. This one was very heavily cleaned up before it was deliberately sunk, so they cut holes in it. They took out all the cabling that might snag people, and so when you go in, even though it is dark, it's really fairly safe. Which doesn't mean you don't want to be careful in here, because you can still catch yourself on a metal flange or something like that. But nonetheless, you can see as she's moving the camera through the hull that there really isn't too much getting in the way. So in essence, it's designed for divers. Now, as the years go by, the walls will eventually collapse, and I'm sure this dive will be taken off of the regular list of dives that are published by the local dive groups. And then they'll sink something else, and we'll use that for a dive site instead. And here we are coming out the other side, and that is it for the Kittiwake. Hope you've enjoyed our videos of the Grand Cayman and Little Cayman diving.